Sapien is a new philosophy, sustainable life philosophy that can augment one's existing spiritual views of the world, or indeed actually create the full tapestry of one's spiritual beliefs. On the website, vitasapien.org, there's a page called Teachings, and Vita Sapien's philosophical system is broken down into 10 parts that give an overview of the philosophy, and I want to talk about those 10 points right now. So just referring to the website, spirituality evolved in humans around 70,000 years ago. So if you actually get the Vita Sapien philosophy pocketbook, you'll notice that the first pages are devoted to a conversation about human evolution. So the way that this is understood is that Homo sapiens, which is our kind, one of numerous types of humans that have existed over long periods. Using that language, the first humans arose around 2.5 million years ago or so, the Homo habilis, and then later we have Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, and from Homo heidelbergensis came Homo sapiens. Okay, Heidelbergensis died out, we remain. Humans, Homo sapiens, our kind, are believed to have evolved around 200 or 300,000 years ago, and for most of that time, behaviorally, very little seems to have changed from our forebears. However, around 70,000 years ago, the evidence suggests that there was this comparatively or relatively rapid change in human cognition, particularly around, so for example, the emergence of cave art. There'd been cave art before. The earliest cave art actually goes back to our kind of ancestors, the Homo neanderthalis, also who evolved out of Heidelbergensis. But all of a sudden the cave art started to become a lot more sophisticated and abundant. Tool use, which had been a feature of humans going back to habilis, tools became a lot more sophisticated. In fact, this is also when archery first appeared in the human toolbox. Archery is very complex. The actual physics of what's involved in actually making a functional hunting bow is very complex. And also funerary practices started to show up with some sophistication, which is evidence of thinking of afterlife issues, which would fall broadly within the realm of spirituality. So for most of the time that Homo sapiens, our kind, have been on Earth, little changed, but then around 70,000 years ago, we see this cognitive revolution. And in Vita Sapien's narrative, this cognitive revolution is effectively the origins or the beginning of human spirituality in its current form. So we say that spirituality effectively began 70,000 years ago. Now you could argue that there was proto-spirituality, that there was different types of spirituality, or that there was spirituality of a lesser form. You could argue that chimps demonstrate certain practices that are evidence of chimp spirituality. Fascinating subject. Don't want to get bogged down. Want to keep clear stepping stones as we move forward in a narrative telling this story. Okay? Fundamental to Vita Sapien philosophy and the origination of spirituality, as I mentioned, is associated through this concept of the cognitive revolution. But the cognition is not just spiritual, it's also kind of engineering. It's about the cognitive revolution gave us art and engineering and spirituality, and these things are all interconnected. And when I say engineering, obviously I'm not talking about bridges at this stage, but I'm talking about the capacity to figure out how to actually use a long stick to shoot a short stick, bows and arrows, archery. Okay, and so these things are all interconnected. It is not as though there is the reality of the world and then there is the spirituality of the world. These things are interconnected, right? They were from the very, very beginning. Okay, so now most of the last 70,000 years, human spirituality has been intimately interconnected with the living planet, and particularly with the landscapes that surrounded the individuals, their home territories, interconnected with seasons, interconnected with wildlife, interconnected with forests and landscapes. Okay, and whilst that may be long lost in contemporary Western spiritualities, or the spiritualities that are practiced within the West, it is nonetheless remains a part of Indigenous worldview and culture. And so Indigenous people amongst us really are basically demonstrating lifestyles and cultures that have remained largely untouched, going back all the way to the beginning of this story around 70,000 years ago and the cognitive revolution. From this cognitive revolution 70,000 years ago, spirituality interconnected with nature, one of the waypoints is the beginning of the Holocene epoch. The Holocene epoch began around, it's a geological term, it refers to the end of the last ice age. It began around 12,000 years ago and was the beginning of this phase, it's called an interglacial, so the ice age is where you get like huge amounts of ice build up. The interglacials are the warm periods in between the glacials. So the interglacial was a warm period, and amongst warm periods it was very stable in temperature, and this created the ideal conditions for the spread of agriculture. Agriculture requires climatic weather systems to be dependable, if you like. So this was a sort of a stepping away from the more hunter-gatherer type lifestyles and cultures that would have been associated with Homo sapiens from the 70,000 years on. So we've got something in the order of 50,000, 60,000 years of Homo sapiens spirituality grounded in ecosystems, but now changed somewhat because of agricultural practices, changed our spiritual conception of the world, and over thousands of years, 10,000 years or so, you start to see these spiritual philosophies become more agricultural focused as opposed to more ecocentric, if you like. But then around 2,500 years ago, a period referred to as the Axial Age. The Axial Age is the period of about 500-year period where most of the philosophies that come to be dominant in the world, I'm talking about the major religions, I'm talking about the early, the antecedents to the Abrahamic religions, I'm talking about Stoicism and Taoism and Confucianism. Okay, these ideas evolved out of this Axial Age period. And what these ideas did was they created a whole new suite of spiritual ideas that took the body of the majority of Homo sapiens, spirituality, separated it from nature. Okay, so we refer to these as denatured spiritualities. And Vita Sapien philosophy holds that the Axial Age and the creation of all these new spiritual ideas, the invention of all of these gods and ideas, has severed the spiritual relationship between Homo sapiens and the living planet for the most part. As I say, Indigenous people still have that. There are certainly people within the West that have a deep spiritual bond to nature, myself included. Okay, but for the most part, people follow philosophies that have distanced us from having a deep love and reverence for the living planet. And this is the very heart of the climate and ecological crisis. The solution to the climate and ecological crisis, therefore, the root If we see that this spiritual disconnection from nature is the root of the climate and ecological crisis, then it suggests that a resolution to the climate and ecological crisis is that we renature people spiritually. We help people become spiritually connected to the living planet. And that may seem abstract, but it's really, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a guy a while back. He was a academic researcher of religions. He was in Scandinavia somewhere, and he said that in Sweden, he says something like 80% of the public are members of a church, and they pay a small amount of money every month just to maintain the infrastructure and so forth, but they don't go to church for spiritual purposes. They go to the forest. And that's really what I'm getting to here, that we seek our spiritual solace in nature, in the forest, on the walks, in the presence of wildlife, down by the beach. That's where we go to find spiritual solace. So the very heart of Vita Sapien philosophy is this idea that we can reconnect. If we reconnect spiritually to nature, we go back to the innate and natural spirituality of humans, which is nature's spirituality, then this is a pathway to resolve the climate and ecological crisis. Why so? Because when you have a spiritual bond with something, you develop moral concern for it. And moral concern is a pathway to expedient action to make things right. Absent a mass movement, absent a global mass movement to reconnect people spiritually to nature, which is, of course, exactly the mission of Vita Sapien, okay, then there is a good chance that we'll continue with our business as usual, and that we will continue pouring greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We'll overheat the planet, and it is conceivable that we will actually extinguish human civilization and the humans in totality off this planet in the coming decades and centuries. Now, I'm not saying decades means 2 decades, within 20 years we're all going to be dead. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that if we continue to burn fossil fuels and destroy nature and to poison the planet with microplastics and toxins, as we are doing now, you can see the trajectory that eventually the Earth system is no longer able to actually maintain conditions that are suitable for human habitation. All right, now, we're already very deep in the weeds on this. 70% of wildlife's been killed off. 97% of mammalian biomass is humans and livestock. Okay, the technosphere outweighs the biosphere. Just read up on the science in the pocketbook. Humans behave like unsustainable super predators, and so forth and so on. We've done so much damage already to the living planet. We're starting to see these potentially not irreversible per se, but these systemic shifts in large-scale climatic systems, with contraction of sea ice, Earth's energy imbalances out of whack, and so forth. So, absent some sort of global revolution connecting people spiritually to nature, the future is basically that of human annihilation, taking down most of nature with us. That's the pathway that we are on right now. Alternatively, with a global mass movement to reconnect people spiritually to nature, we can resolve the Anthropocene crisis. Anthropocene is the name of the modern era in which all of this drama is taking place. So the climate and ecological crisis, we refer to that as the Anthropocene crisis to frame it in time. We can resolve the Anthropocene crisis and then potentially enter the Verdant Age. And the Verdant Age is a potential future time when humanity and the biosphere develop a partnership. Well, it requires us to develop a partnership with nature, okay? That there is a partnership between us and nature, that we thrive in synergy. Thrive means to flourish as opposed to just survive. And in synergy means that our existence on Earth is beneficial to the biosphere, just as the biosphere is beneficial to us. Okay? If we can enter the Verdant Age, okay, which is, to get to the Verdant Age, this requires like this transition. transition of energy, transition of technology, transition of materials, transition of spirituality, a spiritual transition to the verdant age. Then conceivably humans could actually live on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. Okay, our planet won't be habitable for life forever. Okay, sometime in the next few billion years, as the sun chews through its hydrogen fuel, it eventually will swell and become too bright and will eventually scorch life off Earth. But that's several billion years away, 1 to 2 billion years, for example. Okay, so it's Vita Sapien's aspiration that humanity can survive, can thrive in synergy with the living planet, the verdant age, for a galactic year. Now, a galactic year is the time that it takes for the Milky Way galaxy to do one complete rotation about its core, and that's around 230 million years. So Vita Sapien's aspiration is that humanity thrives in synergy with the biosphere, right, for 230 million years. After that, well, we're a long way down the track. We don't have to worry about that. And individuals taking action is vital. So on one hand, Vita Sapien seeks to become a mass movement with tens or hundreds of millions of people involved, but at the end of the day, it comes down to individuals making choices, choosing to adopt the philosophy, choosing to read the philosophy or to listen to these videos or to have conversations to bring the Vita Sapien philosophy into one's life. And so individual action is extremely important, and also using a framework that we call expedience, which is to say, if we're going to take action, we need to take the action that gives the most bang for the buck, the most effective action that we can individually take. And herein lies a personal development aspect to this, that we seek to help vegans become bigger, more powerful, stronger, more capable, and more effective in their own lives and in the life of the living planet. Is that Vita Sapien is an inclusive philosophy, and what that means is that if you're a Christian, there are certain aspects to Vita Sapien philosophy that will conflict with Christian theology. For example, we hold on to the answer to the question, where did we come from? We turn to scientists for that answer, and they talk about deep history, deep time, billions of years, slow evolutionary processes. Sure, that may conflict with some Christian teachings. However, the broad thrust of Vita Sapien, which is that we should care for the living planet, if only because it's our life support system, should resonate with all religions. And so Vita Sapien is not designed to oppose or to replace an existing religion, except it's designed to augment, to bring an ecologically sustainable component to one's spiritual practice. That's Vita Sapien in 10 points. Listen up for more videos coming soon.